Here today. It's my great pleasure to talk about something that is one of my favorite topics, the ways of software people and the way of the dodo. So by quick background on myself, I'm a software developer. I've been writing code for 20 years. I created 3 companies before starting Twilio, and I was one of the first product managers at Amazon Web Services. Now, when I decided to move on from Amazon Web Services, I wanted to start my next company again. And one of the things that I realized when I was thinking through what I wanted to do was that I had a common thread between all 3 of the previous companies that I had started, actually 2 common threads. And these were very different companies. My first company was an academic content company. My second company was a second-hand exchange for live event tickets, StubHub. My third company was a bricks and mortar retailer, of all things. Yet all 3 of these companies, very different products, had 2 common threads. Number one is that each one of these companies, we were using the power of software to beat our competition. And the power of software is the ability to iterate rapidly, always be building, always listen to your customer, always iterating and shipping something that's better than the last version, iterating your way towards perfection. And the second common thread was that every one of these companies, we had needed communications at one point or another in order to build a great customer experience. And every time we needed communications, we had this idea, something we wanted to build. We'd say, well, we're software developers. We don't know the first thing about communications. Making a phone ring is magical. So we'd turn to the communications industry, and we'd say, how are we supposed to build this thing? And the industry would say, essentially, great, you can wire up all these copper wires from the carrier to your data center. You can rack up a bunch of PBXs. But because those boxes were never meant to do this idea that you had, you're going to bring in professional services and they come and configure that whole thing for you. It'll take millions of dollars, and it'll take a few years to build out. And I remember thinking this was the exact opposite of the software ethos. This idea that you'd know exactly what you wanted and you would spend years building it before you got to version 1 and got feedback from your customers seemed insane. Because as software people, we're always shipping. We're always iterating. And so in 2008, we started Twilio to solve this problem of bringing communication out of that realm, the historical realm of hardware and physical things, and into its future, which is software. But I always think back to those vendors and what they were telling me when they were saying, look, you just got to buy all this stuff and trust us. We're going to figure it out for you. And the message that they were sending, they'd always presented as this notion of build versus buy. We're all very familiar with this notion of build versus buy. Right? This is classically what vendors tell you, this argument they set up for you, to tell you that what you need to do is just buy the solution from that vendor. And they give you these arguments, these wisdom that sounds really smart. They tell you things like, why would you go reinvent the wheel? Or they say things like, outsource what isn't core. These are all arguments for saying you should just buy what we have, the solution that we have. And what they're really saying is that it is bad to build. And I just reject that notion. See, as software people, we have figured out that agile processes are the best way to build software and to solve customer problems. And the reason why we've come up with Agile as the methodology we want to use is because we as software developers and software people have realized that big projects aren't predictable. You can't ship a big project on time, on budget with the functionality you wanted. History has proven that. And so we've come up with these other things. We've realized, though, that small milestones along the way are predictable. And that breaking it up into small projects and shipping each of those is how you make progress. And part of this is because of the fact that the problem often changes more rapidly than you can actually deliver the solution. And you don't even fully understand the solution when you start off a project. Right? And as Agile, we figured out this process. It generally goes like this. You start by building your first iteration. Then you release it. You get customer feedback. You realize what you need to do differently for your next revision. You create a plan, and you repeat this process. And that is how you continually iterate your way towards perfection. But when you go that buy approach, and you go to a vendor, it works differently. Typically, how it starts off is with an RFP. Now, you've already lost. Because an RFP presumes that you know all the requirements at the beginning of the project, which we all know you don't. But let's pretend for a second that you do. You do the RFP, you do the dog and pony show with a bunch of vendors, you pick one, you sign a contract, they spend a really long time delivering you the result of that, and then, of course, you start over and you iterate again. No, you don't. It stops right there. If you actually want to do version 2, you have to go back to the vendor, do a new RFP, a new contract, right? So you generally don't do it. And so what's interesting is that buying a solution is essentially going back to waterfall all over again. You're just outsourcing a bad process. And that's the opposite of what we found actually works. See, software people think differently. We have a different way of looking at the world. And this was made very apparent to me during my time at Amazon. I remember a town hall, one of these company all-hands when I was at Amazon. And at this town hall, there was a question from the audience, from one of the employees. I don't even remember what the question is anymore. All I remember is the answer that Jeff Bezos gave. He said, we're a software company. He said, I don't know if you know it or not, if you've realized this, but we're a software company just as much as that other company down in Redmond. They ship CD-ROMs with software on it. But our software makes a brown box show up at your door with just about everything else in it. We're just as much a software company as Microsoft. And our ability to win is our ability to arrange magnetic particles on a hard drive better than our competition. That's what it means to be a software company. And I was like, that's really interesting. What a great definition of what it means to be a software person. Right? People who solve business problems with magnetic particles. Let's ignore SSDs for a minute. So who are these software people? And it's easy to think that it's just developers, but it's not. In fact, being a software person isn't as much a skill set as it is a mindset. It's how you go about solving business problems that makes one a software person. It is anybody who sees the world through the lens of software. And it's not just developers. It is all sorts of people throughout a company who are able to see the business problems you're trying to solve for your customers through this lens. Right? It's people who say, how can software solve this business problem? And what software people fundamentally believe is that any problem can be solved once you pull that problem into the domain of software. And the good news is it's never been a better time in the history of the world to be a software person, because more and more of the world's problems are becoming addressable by software. So let me tell you what I mean by this. So first of all, think about what is software? Or what is computation? Well, computation happens inside of a black box, and it takes some sort of input from the world, and it spits something back out into the world. Right? If a computer did not take information from the world in the form of a sensor of some kind, do some computation on it, and then spit the result back out into the physical world, this black box would be of no use to us because we'd have no idea what was going on inside of it. So that's what computation is. And you think about what we've been doing. We've been making more and more of the world computable, starting with punch cards and teletype machines, moving into text input with keyboards and printers, all the way through audio and video capture. In fact, you can think about the last 70 years of software as being able to digitize more and more of the world into the realm of software. We started in the 50s and 60s with purely numerical problems. Right, calculating census data or missile trajectories, things like that. Those are the first use cases for computers, numbers. Then we moved into textual problems with keyboards and printers, and the PC moved into the office because you had word processors and spreadsheets and things like that. And then the next 20 years of software you can think of as working on media problems because we were able to digitize audio and video, and you got MP3s and YouTube and Jurassic Park as a result of this. And now we're in the next phase of software. It's the everything else phase. Because we're digitizing more and more of the world. See, we're taking the software and we're adding more and more sensors and actuators. The proliferation of sensors and actuators out in the world is tremendous. And this is what's allowing us to compute on more and more of the world's problems. And it's primarily because of this, the smartphone. The smartphone is an always-on, always-connected basket of sensors and actuators that is sensing things out in the world, is able to activate things out in the world with all the screen and all these other things, right? And it's always connected to the internet, so we can always do software to it. And this is amazing. And because of this, because of the fact that more and more of the world is computable, that software mindset is starting to invade every single market in every single industry. Let me show you what I mean by this. How many of you have a remote control for your TV that looks something like that? Right? It's marketed as, you know, it's got 140 keys, which is like a selling point, right? How many keys it has, right? But what it really means is that the functionality that it left the factory with those 180 keys, is all it'll ever do. And that if you want a better remote a few years later, they're going to come out with the 240 key version of it. And that's how you're going to upgrade. That's what not software people do when they're building TV. Here's what software people do. That's the original Apple TV remote. Very few buttons. In fact, only 2 of them actually say on the button what the button does. Why? It's because the rest of the functionality is baked into software. Because the more functionality that you put into that hardware, into that metal and plastic, those are all things you cannot change later. But an Apple TV can get software updates continuously, making that device better and better, addressing a changing competitive landscape, adding new features and functionalities that customers want. Right? That's the difference. That's that software mindset at play. Let's look at another one. I've seen many of these out there, right? Credit card terminals. Again, baked into plastic. All the functionality that that payment terminal will ever do was embedded when it rolled off the assembly line. Right? And if you want new functionality, if some new thing comes out in the United States, we just got chips finally, everyone had to upgrade these and get a new device. Right? Now let's look at what software people do. They build the minimal bridge required from the physical world into the world of computation. A little magnetic strip reader. The absolute minimum that you need to sense that part of the world, a credit card, in order to then bring the rest of it into software in the form of a mobile app or an iPad app that can be updated constantly. In fact, Square updates constantly. They ship every week. A new version of that software is coming out, adding new features, new functionality, responding to competitive threats, fixing bugs, everything. Right? That's software people at work. Absolutely minimal interface to the world. Let's look at another example. Automakers. There's a lot of cars out there. Most automakers love putting buttons everywhere. And they print on the button what it does. But software people realize that when you do that, you've lost all your future flexibility. So when software people build a car, it looks like this. You take every non-essential piece of hardware out and you put it into the touchscreen. Why? Because you can update that software over the air whenever you see fit. And I love the example of Tesla. You know, a few years ago, they had a big PR kerfuffle when there was a car on the freeway. It hit a piece of debris. The battery caught fire. Everyone was safe. But it was a big PR issue asking if these electric cars were safe. Now, at most automakers, when they ran into an issue like that, they would have done a recall of millions of cars. It would have cost a huge amount of money. But at Tesla, here's what they said. They said, you know what, okay, we're going to raise the ride height of the car by 1 inch at freeway speeds. They pushed it out and over there, update, done. It cost them nothing. Right? That's the power of software applied to these industries. Let's look at another example. Right? The most popular phone in the world, the Nokia 1600, when the iPhone was introduced. You look at all those buttons. Then, of course, along came Steve Jobs. He said, we're getting rid of all of those buttons. We're getting rid of that keyboard. Why? Because we can't update it later. We can't make it better, depending on what app you're using or future releases of our software. Right? And he was correct, because they've been able to successfully push many different types of software, many of which they don't even need a keyboard at all, to this device over time. That's on the consumer side. Let's look at the enterprise side. Here's one of the latest and greatest from Cisco. Enterprise desk phone. You see it's got all those buttons, got a nice screen. And I know what you're saying. I put it under the not software people side. You're like, Cisco employs a lot of software developers. How can you tell me that Cisco is not a software company? Well, let me put it this way. You might not be software people when this is how you scale it out. This is not Photoshop. This is an actual product photo from the Cisco website. Adding more plastic. Now, software people know that the ideal telephone is the minimal bridge between the physical world and the software world. The absolute minimum you need, and you maintain everything else in software. This is the software person's ideal telephone. Just the absolute minimum you need to bridge these two worlds. Because software people love preserving agility. Because agility is the ability to adapt later. That's one of the most precious things that software people hold true. And this is becoming very important. See, as companies have to compete now for customers' attention, the most important thing is customer experience. And that is something that you always have to be iterating on to stay ahead. In fact, it's not just me saying this, it's Forrester research. Harley Manning says, the only source of competitive advantage is the one that can survive technology-fueled disruption, an obsession with customer experience. And what's interesting is if you think about software, it used to be that we used software to power our back office, our shipping, our financials, our ERP, things that customers never saw or never cared about. But nowadays, the interface most companies have with their customers is a digital one. Mobile apps, web applications, SaaS. It's software. And when your interface with your customers, your brand, your customer experience is software, you can't just buy something from a vendor and put it in place and say your job is done. Why? Because all your competitors will buy the same thing and you're completely undifferentiated. No. In today's world where the digital interface is the most important one you have with your customers, differentiation has to be built. It can't be bought by definition. That's why that software ethos is becoming critical to nearly every industry, new and old, big and small. And you know, at Twilio, we get to work with a lot of customers who are using this software ethos, software people, to build these kinds of applications. One of them is ING Bank. You might think, one of the biggest industries on the planet. One of the biggest banks on the planet, right? How can they be using the power of software and being agile? They've taken it as their corporate ethos to use agility as their main competitive advantage. This is from their website, right? They're actually explicitly comparing it to software companies and saying the 3 reasons why we're choosing agile: we're more efficient, more flexible, we can innovate faster with a shorter time to market, we're a more attractive employer, and our employees have more freedom when they get to iterate quickly, right? This is pretty amazing that ownership and imagination and creativity and valuing speed to market, these are the things that ING is, from a corporate perspective, pushing. And it's not just engineering, it's the entire company is embracing agility as they move into a future which is software. We have another customer, TransferWise. TransferWise is using software to challenge the market for international money movement. And they focus on building a great customer experience. That's how they differentiate. And we have the CEO and co-founder of TransferWise here today to talk about it. So please welcome up Tavit Henrikus to tell us a bit about TransferWise and how they're using software. Please welcome up Tavit.
Hey, Jeff.
Tavit, welcome.
Thank you.
So first of all, tell us a bit about TransferWise.
So we really started TransferWise to solve our own problem, a little bit similar to your story. So I'm from a tiny country called Estonia, and I used to work for another nice disrupting company called Skype. I was part of the team that built Skype and got it to market. At one point, I moved to London, but I was still getting paid in Estonia. So every month, I went to my bank. I told them, hey, dear bank, can you transfer 1,000 euros from Estonia to London? And they said, yes, Mr. Tavit, we're happy to do it. It's going to cost you 25 euros. Sounds like not a great deal, but okay, not so horrible. So I say, let's do it. I go to London. I go to my bank, I look at my bank statement, and I see a couple surprises. First of all, I realized the money took 3, 4, 5 days to arrive. And second of all, I realized that these sneaky bastards, they had put in a hidden charge. So they took away another 3-4% of my money by using an exchange rate, which is very different from the ones that I saw on Google. So this was kind of what got me upset, and realizing that every time I do it, every month I do it, I lose 50, 70, 100 euros. Made me start thinking, hey, is there something we can do about it? And that's when I met Krista, who became my co-founder, and we realized there's a much better way of doing it. We can help ourselves, and we can help hundreds of millions of people around the world who have the very same need and who are getting a very poor service from banks.
Now tell me, I know customer experience has been a major part of what you've focused on in building the company. Why does a customer choose TransferWise over one of the legacy options?
It's super simple, and we spend tons of time with our customers to learn about why they choose TransferWise, how they use TransferWise. And it comes down to a few simple things. First is speed. So as I was mentioning, when I made my transfer, it took 3, 4, 5 days for the money to arrive. Using TransferWise, we're focusing on speed. Today, you can send money from Australia to UK. It'll get there instantaneously, quicker than the speed of sound. Boom. That's something which has not been done before. So speed is number one. Second is cost. So we got pissed off at large hidden fees that banks are charging, but also the fees they charge per transaction, 25 euros in my case, or 20, 30, $50 in the US. That's a bit too much. So if you add that up, you end up losing between 5 to 10% of your money. So using TransferWise, we do it on average 8 times cheaper than your bank. So you end up paying, for example, 5 euros to send 1,000 euros. And last is really about the customer experience. So having my background from Skype, we have people from all the best internet companies in the world. We kind of thought about, so what does it mean to build a financial service in the 21st century? How do we make it as easy to use as it is to pick a new song on Spotify, to get a car with your favorite taxi app, or to make a phone call using Skype? So ease of use, price, and speed.
So now it used to be like if you wanted to create a new banking company, right, you would have to go build branches and do all sorts of things, but you're using software to really build that better customer experience. Can you tell me, like, how is software making it possible for you to challenge incumbents in this space?
I think fundamentally it all starts with this. It starts with a smartphone. Your most important bank branch is the one which is in the pocket now. So back in the days to start a bank...
So the branch is your phone?
Exactly. Back in the days to start a bank, you would have to start laying out your branch network. Then you were thinking about all the processes which really involve shuffling paper around from one branch to the main headquarters and back. So now all of that is what we do with software. The bank branch is with you all the time. The experience is what you can put on this screen with no buttons. And then it's about digitizing the processes which used to involve paper and pen back in the days, and thinking about how do we do it in the 21st century? How do we identify a customer? We can take a selfie. If you want to take a loan, an application is going to be on your phone. Sending money, we're going to take it straight from a bank, pay straight out. So all of that happens on your phone.
And is that key to how you're able to both bring down the cost and create that better customer experience?
Absolutely true. So for us, really, the key innovation to being able to offer the price and speed is we're building out our own network to move the money around. So if you use a bank or Western Union, you typically end up using the old SWIFT network, which gets implemented in a very clumsy way by banks. So we've realized that, actually, if you move money around locally, you can do it much quicker. So we're plugging into all of the local payment networks around the world. And by doing that, we can offer payments at real-time speed and for close to zero cost. And that's all done by software. All the processes, which back in the day would be done in a bank back office and on paper, just making all of that done in software.
And so starting from zero today, leveraging the power of software, you're really able to innovate very quickly because you don't have a lot of the baggage, and you invest heavily in software developers. I think a lot of your company is software developers too, and you use Agile and are always shipping, all those methodologies.
Totally. I mean, it's probably 25 to 30% of the company which is focused on building. So engineers, product managers, designers, people who help to make the product look and talk nice. So, and these people are shipping 24/7. We have 15 to 20 software development or product teams, and they all ship on their own schedule. So there is no shrink-wrap box which gets released once a year and then it takes 6 months to get to the customer.
Or even better than that, like think about some process that you want to change, where if you had hundreds or thousands of branches, how long does it take to retrain thousands of employees versus Which another version of the software.
It's forever versus now.
What's been your biggest challenge getting to this point?
So we're dealing with people's money. So when we launched the company, we were two Estonians who popped up on the internet. So getting people to trust two Eastern Europeans with hundreds of thousands of dollars, euros, is quite a big challenge. It's a little bit of a leap of faith. We launched the company 6 years ago, and fintech might start appearing in people's vocabulary now, but back then, nobody really knew about it. So trust and obtaining trust from customers is super important. What we've learned is it actually comes down to making a kick-ass product. So making sure you're doing something which is faster, which is cheaper, and much better to use. And the result of that is you get a flywheel going. You have happy customers who have an experience which leaves them thinking, wow, why didn't my bank do it this? Why didn't my bank do it this way? And then they end up telling their friends about it. So most of the new customers, TransferWise, come because an existing customer recommended us.
Wow, and so what's key to that, getting over that trust, is really if the customer experience is good enough, people will try it out. And if you deliver on it, they'll all tell their friends, which further accelerates that trust cycle. It's amazing the power of customer experience to really build a business. Even when you're handling people's money, that customer experience really is the chief thing that people are thinking about. So how's the company doing now?
We're doing quite well. So we're live in 35 countries. We launched 6 years ago. And today there are more than 1 million people using TransferWise, and we're moving more than $1 billion every month. But really, I think this is a starting point for TransferWise. And from here, looking forward to how do we go to making sure that we have at least 8% market share in every country. That's 8% is what we have in UK today. So next step, let's get this everywhere, and then let's see where we can go.
Awesome. Congratulations on all that success. I mean, that is what software lets you do, right? Go a 6-year-old company, be live in 35 countries with 1 million customers, to move at that speed and to grow as fast as you can. Congratulations. That's amazing. Let's hear it for Tavit. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tavit. Going back to what Harley Manning says, right? It's a great example here, both from the incumbent in the space, ING Bank, who's moving quickly to solve customer problems, and from TransferWise, a challenger in the banking market, right? That obsession with customer experience is what ultimately is going to cause companies to win. And I believe this fact because the pace of software innovation is moving at such a high rate that ability to adapt, that ability to constantly ship new updates, listen to your customers, get feedback, launch in new countries, that is going to drive business success. In fact, I think we're heading into a period of Darwinian natural selection. Because literally, companies that can adapt quickly to changing customer preferences are going to be those companies who survive. Every industry is going to become a software industry. So the question is not whether you as a company ultimately build versus buy. It's whether you build versus die. And I think that's the business reality that we are now heading into, because if you don't build, you too will go the way of the dodo. Thank you very much. Have a great Mobile World Congress.